G'day everyone, how are you? Jackie McIntyre here. Welcome. It's a beautiful rainy day outside, Friday morning for us, for all the people that are hanging out in the Northern Hemisphere. Then it will be Thursday evening for you. Thank you so much for coming along and joining. The reception to the webinars that we've been doing have been fantastic, and we've been getting lots of questions that have been coming into the office, of which I have been able to answer some of those questions this week in this week's webinar. And we're really lucky because this is the second webinar series that we've been able to do over the last couple of months. And for many of you, you're coming along and joining us for this whole journey. So as I said, this is the second episode that we're doing in this whole webinar series where we're understanding and healing a topic that's pretty big and impacts every single person, which is judgment and projection. Now, as we go throughout this entire one today, I want to encourage you to ask questions. You know, if you can see yourself in any of this, just, pop it down into the comments. If you have any feedback from anything that I go through, if you can see yourself in it, if you can see somebody else in what I'm talking about, then pop it into the comments as well, because I'm really happy to help any way that I can and to answer any questions that I can as well. All right then, so let's go ahead, get straight into this. I am going to be putting some links into the comments as we go through, or at the end of the webinar. So just have a scrounge through. If I mention anything and refer to a link, have a look through the comments and it will be there as we go through, yeah? Rightio, week 2, judgment and projection, such a big one. As I said, this is the second episode in this powerful webinar series in healing and understanding judgment and projection. And I say understanding because nearly everyone has a profound lack of really understanding the mechanics of judgment or projection, where it comes from, why it forms, how it works within the body, how it impacts a person's body-mind complex, because it does have massive, great big impact, how we see that coming out in certain behaviors, attachments, habits, patterns that people get themselves into, things that they trigger towards, all these kinds of things, but not really understanding why that happens or how it happens. So the healing part comes from, as I'm going to mention in this webinar several times, showing up and doing things like this and other things that I'm going to be mentioning as well. Today's webinar is going to be a shorter time for us compared to some of the other webinars that I've done. And there's a specific reason for that. It's because my goal is to give you snack-sized, bite-sized pieces of information that you can really digest and understand easily. If I give you too much information, it's going to simply just overwhelm you and you won't be able to digest it easily and it won't make sense to you. So then it won't be of any use to you and you won't be able to put it into practice in moving forward. So we do small bite-sized pieces, and then that way you can assimilate with it just really easily. And don't forget, even after you've watched a webinar, or if you get the webinar sent out to you, if you're on my subscription list and you get it sent out to you by email, if you don't understand any part of it, if it doesn't make sense to you, you've sat on it for a little while and you're thinking to yourself, I'm still not really clear about this bit, then just email me back or put it into the comments and I will approach it from a different direction. I'll make sure that it's clearer for you. And then what I want to do after giving you these little bite-sized morsels is that I want to leave you to roll around in that information and digest it deeply so it moves through all levels of your mind and your consciousness. You know, we often think that when we talk about digesting, that you just digest food or you digest, something that you drink. But digestion is far more than that. You're digesting exactly what I'm talking to you about right now. You're digesting the whole world around you, everything that you experience. You've got to digest that. It runs throughout your entire etheric brain. It runs through multiple systems. It runs through all levels of your consciousness, your brain, your organs, everything. Every part of you has to digest life. And sometimes it just doesn't do that well for many, many different reasons, and it can't keep up, which is why we do snack-sized pieces to make sure that you can keep up with that. And by the time, a week has gone past, you've been able to digest it all, understand it all, not only from a conscious perspective, but also deeply conscious, then you're ready for the next piece of information, which will be next Friday in our next webinar. Now, somebody asked me, how many episodes is this webinar series going to be on judgment and projection? I don't have an answer for that, because I'm really just showing up and trusting my intuition and being guided by my gut instincts. So I did have a sense, a rough outlay, that it was going to be 3 free webinars that I did in this series, but it could very well be 4 or even 5. It depends, as I go through the process of breaking it all down, how much we've got to look at that I feel like I want to take you through. And then also, if something's too big for you to be able to get through, then I'll break it into a smaller bit. So we could have a whole webinar series that goes anywhere between 3 and 5, webinars, which will be good for you. Okay. So today's is smaller and shorter compared to other ones. That's my plan anyway. Depends on what questions you all have for me. Hey, gorgeous Stacey. So be sure to ask me questions along the way. Give me your own experiences as we go along, and I'll answer them as best as we can. Last week, I led you all through a really simplified understanding of how we perceive reality via our senses, primarily hearing, sight, smell, taste, and touch, and how these senses have a large amount of what we call filters attached to them. So I don't want to go back and double up on information. If you missed that first one, I highly recommend going back and watching that again, because it will make a lot of sense to every other webinar that we do after that, right? But if you imagine, just for example, the sense of hearing, and if the sense of hearing has like filters in on it, the way that I visually picture filters is kind of like a colander. I don't know if we call it colander all over the world, but we call it colander or sieve here. And you would drain your veggies through a colander. And the idea is that filter catches your vegetables, the good stuff that you need, the nutritious stuff you need, and lets everything else fall away. That's the idea of having a healthy filter. Although a lot of people have filters that are either clogged up, so they serve no purpose at all, just captures everything, doesn't stop, stops very little from going through, or the filters are really distorted. These filters can have information in it. And so as your reality comes in and it's coming in through that sense, these filters, which are distorted, they're corrupt, they can be corrupting the information as it comes through. So by the time you get the version of what it is that you're hearing, 9 times out of 10, it's not even really the way that it is happening for you. You're getting a distorted sense of reality. So we looked at that last week. That's important to know for, moving forward and understanding what judgment and projection is all about. So they really skew your perception of reality and things. It happens to everyone. It's just that some people, it happens a lot more, okay? And that can be for a lot of different reasons. It doesn't make them bad or good or anything like that. It's just for all different reasons, because everyone has their own unique story, right? So you're simply not perceiving life as it actually is. And that can be a really sometimes challenging concept for people to wrap their minds around, because the conscious mind is massively attached to its own truth and what it is that it is thinking, that it is hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, everything like that. So when you challenge the mind and say, you're actually not perceiving everything that there is to perceive, you're not giving a proper, clear version of this to yourself, the mind will really quite often challenge that. It'll want to retaliate against it in some cases. It'll want to go into judgment. It'll stick its hands on its hips and it will say, what do you tell me? What do you mean I'm not, perceiving things the way that I really, really am? I can see that over there and I can hear what you're saying to me. And so it sits, because all of this is happening at a deep subconscious level, even an unconscious level. The conscious mind, your conscious mind, doesn't have any access to that. It can't see that. So it's trying to defend itself just from this standpoint without even actually realizing what's really going on underneath the surface. So when I sort of say to you, you're getting a really distorted view of reality majority of the time, most of the time, if not nearly all of the time, just be okay with that. Let it rest inside you in a comfortable space, and then let it flow on and evolve any way that it's meant to, because the more you push against that and have resistance against it, the harder it's going to be for you to be able to resolve your own internal judgments, especially, and then to be able to deal with, say, judgments that are coming from other people, or even understanding judgment. Okay, so as I said, that first webinar will be able to help you out with that as well. So what we do know is that there are people, lots and lots and lots of people around the world, we're probably speaking to some right now, who become less filtered, but still nonetheless filtered. Okay, they have filtration systems there that aren't as bad or aren't as corrupt as, say, what others can be. And a person who transcends the heavy filtration system that's going on in the senses and then in the brain is able to be all sensing. They're considered to be enlightened. Okay, so just as an FYI, if you ever come across a person or a guru or something like this who claims to be enlightened, they will not be an enlightened person. They are not enlightened. You can challenge that as much as you want, because an enlightened person will never declare their own enlightenment, because they just have simply no attachment to actually even being enlightened. So they have no attachment or no need to want to speak about it or boast about it or confirm it to other people or to make sure other people know that they are enlightened or anything like that. So there are very few people around the world who are truly, truly, truly enlightened. And there are lots of people out there that claim to be enlightened, but perhaps they don't truly understand the full meaning of it. But that's what happens as you sort of do this self-inquiry work and you find where you feel uncomfortable, and then you challenge it and you find out why you feel uncomfortable, and then you learn to be able to transcend it. Then you get to a much happier place. You become less filtered. And the more unfiltered you become, the happier you become. And that is then on that process, or walking in the steps towards enlightenment, I suppose, for want of a better word. Now, the iceberg analogy, we used that last week. Did you see it? We breezed over this to help us understand some of the different levels of the mind. We looked at how we're interpreting yourself and the world around you, including people, events, things, via the conscious part of your mind. So you can see me and you can interpret me and the bits and pieces around you. But you're also interpreting probably over 30 million bits of data per few seconds. 30 million bits of data per few seconds is what the mind itself as a whole is able to interpret. And the more we discover and learn about the mind, the more that increases. We're finding out that the capacity is more. So we're really just on the frontier of really diving into this and understanding it. We're in a really great position to be in to do that, to evolve and to be able to heal. So it's those other parts of the mind especially we're sort of focusing on the subconscious part of the mind or the unconscious part of the mind. That is what sits underneath the water surface in that iceberg analogy. And the idea is that you can't see what's there that sits underneath the water. You don't know what is in the sub and unconscious. It's unconscious. It's underneath the water surface. You're just experiencing life from the viewpoint of that you are that top part of the iceberg. You are the conscious mind. And that conscious mind is fiercely attached to itself and its way of doing things and who it is and its identity and everything like that. Yeah. Now, it drives nearly every part of your life, this subconscious mind. It drives all of your judgments, your projections, your fears, what angers you, the things that you trigger towards, things that you have hidden beliefs towards are hidden here deeply unconscious. And these hidden beliefs form your core belief systems for then how you live your life and how you believe that others should live their life too. So judgment is not something that you're born doing. I have met a lot of people who think this. You know, you're born being judgmental. It's just there with you. But because judgment starts from such a young age, they forget. They don't have that memory of how it just slowly starts to find its way in and settle in. It's definitely not natural to you. Okay? You do have this inborn innate ability that strives to have a certain existence, and judgment is not one of those things that it actually strives for. Everybody's innate inborn wisdom strives to have balance of the mind, where the mind is not in conflict with itself or with the rest of the world, right? That would feel more like deep peace, being deeply centered, while also being able to thoroughly enjoy life. Also would be balance of emotions, and the body would be balanced. So it doesn't mean that a person doesn't go through things, but it's just so much evenly balanced, right? That part of a person, that innate wisdom, really seeks peace, it seeks freedom, and most of all, it seeks love. Love of self, love of everything around it. So for anyone to not be having those experiences, we know that there is imbalance. That is just what sits there. And in the case of most people, it's actually quite a lot. The most imbalance that we see will actually be the imbalance that is held within the mind. And then the imbalance that is in the mind, when the mind becomes unbalanced, really, really not healthy, that will cause massive things to happen and go wrong in the body, even like really severe disease processes, internal trauma, mental health issues, addictions, all these kinds of things can be from a really unbalanced, unhealthy mind. And when the mind does become healthy, balanced, it has a really healthy understanding and interpretation of itself, right? It doesn't think it's a be all and end all, doesn't try to control, and that has a really healthy flow and effect to the rest of the body mind complex. It's instant. It's always instant, okay? So don't forget to just ask some questions if they come up for you as we go along the way. You can leave it in the comments if you like. Every person comes imprinted with lots and lots and lots of information from your ancestral lines, both out through your matriarchal and patriarchal lines. But basically, when you're born, you are this tiny new human just in the experience of life. That's what babies do best. That's what you did best as a newborn. You just experienced the moment. You're not consciously looking to create the conflict of judgment within yourself or towards somebody else. You didn't see somebody and think, oh my gosh, why are they wearing that on a day like today? That's ridiculous. Or, why would you buy a new car when the one that you had was good enough? It's just greedy. Or what's another one? People like that shouldn't be allowed to sit for that position. You didn't do any of that. It wasn't natural to you, right? And until you started to feel badly about yourself growing up young. So remember, the first 0 to 7 years profoundly shape all people for the rest of their life. So it's where the big, massive core belief systems form, and then they take flight from there, growing out from there. So until you started to feel badly about yourself, started to gain and adopt beliefs, thoughts and feelings about your own unworthiness, own unlovability, your faults, your not being intelligent enough or smart enough or quick enough or good enough or impressive enough or whatever it is, you didn't even recognize that judgment came your way. So when you were tiny little, you wouldn't even recognize that a judgment was coming your way if somebody in your environment made a judgment towards you. And I've seen lots of adults over the years that have looked at a baby and gone, oh my God, look at the head on that. Judgment, that's clear judgment, and it's a massive projection as well. But that baby is not consciously aware of that judgment. It's not until it starts to get older that it really starts to form its own identity and the mind starts to work in a very different way. That then starts to take on some of those judgments and some of those beliefs about how unlovable they are and all the other things that I mentioned. So you have to have a lack, and this is really important to understand, you have to have a lack of belief in self. You have to have a lack of connection to self. You have to have a lack of love of self and a relationship of self to be able to register something coming from someone else as judgment. Okay? So you would most likely would observe if somebody else was projecting towards you, you would most likely observe it as a projection, so a judgment from them towards you, but you would not receive it or trigger towards it as a judgment on you. Yeah? So when I meet with a client one-on-one or in group work, I'm always listening for their dialogue, because their dialogue tells me lots, especially when they're talking about judgment in this regard. The way that they speak about judgment will tell me very, very clearly and very, very quickly whether they are simply observing someone projecting judgment towards them, so they're being quite neutral and just observing it, or whether they've really taken it personally and then they are like, they were judgmental towards me. They were so judgmental towards me, and it hurt me deeply. And then that shows me that they've taken it on, that they've adapted to it, and it also shows me, first and foremost, that they actually believe it. Somewhere inside them, they had to have believed it first for them to be able to accept it. That, because you don't accept it if you don't believe it, right? If you are solid and firm with yourself, if you are connected to yourself, if you really dig who you are and you love who you are, you just simply won't accept the judgment. But you're more likely to have empathy towards a person because you understand that for whatever their own reasons, they are projecting judgment. Okay? It just doesn't, this is a no-go zone, doesn't come in here, yeah? So it means that you can't be offended by somebody else's judgment, that they're trying to direct towards you unless you already have the judgment within yourself, firmly directed at yourself. So for that to happen, most of it is deeply, deeply subconscious. You simply blame them, or if we're talking about another person, not necessarily you, other people will be blaming the judger. You're being judgmental towards me. I hate it when you're judgmental towards me, right? When in actual fact, you're blaming them for highlighting ways in which you deeply feel about yourself. That's all it is. And it hurts, which is then why you trigger. And then also why you get judgmental back to them. Because it's like, you hurt me. Now I'm going to hurt you back, right? It's so fascinating the way that we build defenses and we react towards these things. And for people who are asking, like, how do I uncover and repair these unconscious beliefs and feelings? You do exactly what you're doing right now. You just show up. You become a cheerleader for yourself bit by bit. Working on your relationship with yourself will repair every single relationship that you have. And it will change the way in which you view the people in the world around you, everyone, not just the people you know, strangers on the street, everyone in the world around you. The judgment towards yourself drops away bit by bit, sometimes in massive, great big chunks. And then the judgment towards others does the same naturally. And it feels amazing. You will want to continue to do that simply because of how brilliant it feels. Because it feels like freedom. And I'm yet to meet somebody who doesn't innately want freedom. Everyone is striving to feel free. Yeah. So another thing that you can do is to become a seeker of truth, seeking to be able to be clear sensing. So clearing out some of those clogged up, distorted filters of the five senses so that you can interpret yourself, other people in the world around you with clarity as it truly is, or better than the way that you have been doing it. And another way is to seek help and support. Now, I can do that for you. I have a limited space to be able to do this one-on-one, but I can do it. But I have lots of space in my community, which is called My Incredible Orbit. And that's where the magic happens, because it's designed to bring you back home to yourself in a really, really, really powerful way. There is actually I've got it open. There's actually a wait list that you can join if you're interested, where you can start to get some of the tools and resources sent to you by my team, and that you can see what it's like, get a taste of what it's like to be in our beautiful community. We can send you some of those things. And then later on in the year, when we officially open My Incredible Orbit again, then you'll be first in line to take advantage of the special offers and bonuses on offer. So I'll leave a link in the comments after, and you can use that to join the waitlist for My Incredible Orbit if you like. So as I mentioned earlier, you have a certain amount of genetic and ancestral wider family lines. So it just doesn't go back out through your mum and dad and then out through their mum and dad. You know, these families are spread out. There are mums and dads who have brothers and sisters, so there's uncles and aunts, and then there's cousins and everything. There's a wider family matrix there, and information from there passes on and then shows up within the person. So how much and what it is that shows up is different in everybody. So things like health challenges, personality traits, attitudes, behaviors, habits and patterns, even memories, traumas get passed on. It's a huge area where that has been really given a lot of looking at right now as epigenetics and understanding how these memories, especially stress-based memories and trauma experiences, pass on through genetic lines. and then show up and get triggered within people, right? It explains a lot for what's going on for some people, and it certainly can be big defining reasons on what causes some people to be really highly judgmental and projecting a lot onto other people. So it's a big area of discovery where we can do an enormous amount of work right now, which is great. Okay, so let me see if we've got any questions so far. No questions. Hello. Let me know what your name is when you come in. I want to see who's here so I can say good day. Sometimes a person can be going through something which is really quite stressful, and it triggers more of those attitudes, the personality traits, etc., that I just mentioned a few seconds ago, to show up. So it's really easy for somebody to say get into their mid-20s, have some really big financial stress and traumas that show up. They might find themselves homeless for a little while, and it can really trigger some very old, deep epigenetic or ancestral information to show up. If there have been ancestors that have, been through the Great Depression, or suffered really horrendous financial trauma, them themselves were kept in concentration camps, or they were homeless or whatever, that information can activate within that person, that 20-something-year-old going through financial stress. It can activate, and it's like it's a volcanic, and it can erupt over out on top of what they're already got going on and their own experience, which means that the stress that they were experiencing then also is 10 times infold. And it is now something much, much bigger that we have to deal with. So we're only just sort of touching the tip of the iceberg, so to say, with this epigenetic word, but it looks like it's a real game changer when it comes to addressing people and being able to help people through stress, through trauma, through judgment, through projection, and also, their return journey to self, because that's where it's at. That's where the magic happens. It's also one of the reasons why it can seem that people regress further into themselves. So they can bring upon themselves more judgment, poor behaviors, really rigid mind, rigid beliefs. When that happens, when that epigenetic or the past ancestral stuff seems to activate and trigger within them on top of their own stuff that they're already dealing with. And then the person who gets a support team in and around them during stress will be the one who supersedes all that old information that sits there potentially to be activated. So when a person has a good, and I've talked about this a lot in the past because I just believe in it so deeply, and I've seen how great it is. But when a person has a really good collection of resources around them during stressful times that they can reach out to and resource, when they need to, such as professionals like doctors. If you're going to have a doctor, please have a doctor that you like or that you get along with, one that you resonate with. If you don't, then go find another one. Okay, there's lots of them out there. That's really, really important. Whoever you have in and around your team, it's important that you resonate with them and that you get along with them. I have a huge amount of clients that go to see doctors that they don't even like. They don't even believe in them really, but they'll blindly do and, go along and do what they are told to do. But that relationship it's a deal breaker. It really, really affects them. So make sure that you've got professionals in and around you that you resonate with, that you really, really like, and they will work even better for you and with you because of that connection. There are other integrated healthcare specialists like me. You've got meditation, movement, nutrition, water, other liquids that you can drink, which are highly, highly beneficial. They're all resource tools, okay? But there are other things that also need to be part of that resource team too, such as the sun, getting sun as close to every single day as you possibly can is vitally important because of the way that it converts vitamin D and your body uses vitamin D. Now, for people who experience anxiety, depression, quite often vitamin D, low vitamin D, is a huge, huge factor. And then sometimes there's other vitamins that are lacking and minerals lacking as well, especially in the B group vitamin range. So what I'm finding now is when I have clients come to me and they've been experiencing any kind of mental health issue, and I don't really like the term mental health, but that's a whole nother story, but I'll use it because people are familiar with it and they know what I'm talking about when I say it. If somebody's experiencing, profound anxiety, depression, then we have to look at these things because that quite often is one of the core ingredients of what is leading to that depression. And when you support the body adequately and build it up and give it the vitamin D, the sun, the vitamin B group vitamins that it needs, this person can radically feel different just in a few days. So things like the sun, your vitamins, your supplements, very, very important to you, okay? Getting as much time in nature as possible, because nature is one of the most healing tools and most underrated tools that people don't recognize. So being near parks, rivers, beaches, just hanging out in the garden, you want to rally all of that and have it in and around you. So when a person can do this and use that resource team around them that consists of all these really amazing things, and your resource team might be slightly different depending on what you've used in the past, what your knowledge base is, who you've got access to, what you really resonate with. I've helped lots and lots of people over the years build resource lists simply because they didn't have one. And when they hit rock bottom or things became hard, they have stresses in life, which happens all the time, right? They just had no footing for then knowing how to be able to do that. So building consciously, sitting and building a resource list, probably one of the most powerful things that you could do for yourself. Very, very empowering, okay? So when a person does this for themselves and they can use that resource team that consists of all these really cool things, then that person will float through an experience much easier, especially if they're going through, stress or trauma, and then if there is ancestral / epigenetic information sort of imploding in on that as well. They are the ones that seem to cruise through that just so much easier. They get to the other side of it much quicker. And then that they find that they're not imprinted or affected by that event nearly as much as, say, what another person would be. So in, a little bit of time to come, they don't look back on it and still feel quite emotional or triggered by it. It's now neutral to them. And that's when a person knows that they've really worked through something, that it doesn't affect them anymore, is when you can look back on something, think about it, and it doesn't cause you stress. It doesn't cause you to be sad or angry or fearful. It doesn't trigger you in any way, okay? So that's always something good to know if you're trying to figure out if you have overcome something, if it doesn't affect you anymore, if you've got anything around that that still has to be addressed. If you really go back into that and if you use all your five senses to think back about that and recall that event or that situation, whatever it is, if you feel yourself getting triggered, you've still got some work there. Now, whatever issue it is that's involved with that, whatever's there to be resolved, it most likely sits in the subconscious. But that's where you then reach out to your resource team, use whatever it is that you feel like you need to plug into and use, and they will help you get through that. So then you end up being quite neutral to it all. So it's really like quite a beautiful process to go through. So as a recap, if you go through really stressful times or trauma and you do not use your resource, systems and support systems around you, and you do not do the small amounts of self-inquiry that's required, then it'll have you growing into a place of being quite rigid in the mind. These people quite often later in life are the ones that you can't argue with them. You can't have a conversation with them because the mind becomes too rigid. They see things very black and white. They're very attached to their way of viewing things, and that's all there is to it. Yeah. And then quite often that old unresolved stuff, which is actually fear-based, can come out as anger. And then it projects as beliefs, and they project it as thoughts onto others. And most of all, it becomes really, really judgmental. Okay. Who do we have here? We've got Stacey. We've got somebody else here. You can let me know who you are. Stress untreated can become really rigid judgment and projection. So gathering your strong list of resources around you so that you know what you have access to when stress of any kind, doesn't matter what it is, it's just of any kind, then you know what fits you, and you can go into a process of self-inquiry, move past it, evolve from it, grow from it, learn from it, and truly be able to move on from it. So simple questions that you can use. Somebody always says to me, well, how do I learn from an experience? How do I grow from an experience? There's some really, really simple questions that you can ask yourself, such as, what did this teach me? And what would I do differently if it comes up again? Always taking it back to your behavior, your part in this, not necessarily, to do with the other person or putting blame back on them. This is a self-reflective thing. So out of that whole experience, what did this teach me? And what would I do differently next time? And what did I learn about myself from this experience? And that will bring you quite a bit of clarity. You quite often will learn a lot about yourself, but then quite often you sort of rebuilding that relationship with yourself. Everybody has a relationship to build with themselves. Nobody is super perfect in their relationship with themselves. So you rebuild that relationship with yourself a little bit more. It really empowers you. It strengthens you. And the next time a similar situation comes around, you're geared to deal with that completely differently. And you have insight into it as well, and then how you work and how you would do it differently. Okay. So another way that you and everybody else learns how to be judgmental to yourself, to other people, to things, to situations, is by us looking at your first 0 to 7 years of your life. So from the moment of birth up to around about 7 years of life. Definitely the first 5, but for a lot of people it stretches out to about 7. You're literally, during this time, a sponge, a massive sponge, just sponging information from your environment every which way you can. The people around you teach you how to be in the world. You're learning off them at double speed. And you're learning off them at double speed to learn how to be in the world, okay? They're not deliberately teaching you. You're not consciously in a learning mode, but this is what's happening. It's such a high growth period that every part of you is literally looking to learn for how it is going to be when it grows up, okay? All of the experiences that you had were sensory experiences. And this sensory information comes in through sense of hearing, sight, smell, taste, touch, in through the skin, and it leaves a massive imprint of information in the memory centers. And you use this information that has come in and then gone to the brain and to the mind, and you use this information that tells you what something smells like, what it sounds like, what it tastes like, and what it feels like using the sense of touch. These memory centers are not just in your head brain, because we have three brains, right? Head brain, heart brain, gut brain. So we don't just have memory centers in the head brain, we have memory centers throughout the whole body. Potentially any part of your body can hold memory. Okay. And I have some really, really cool stories of how this has shown up from all the people that I've treated, over the past 12, 13 years or whatever it's been. So a really well-known one that I remember is, and there's been several documented cases of this, is people who have had transplants of some kind, and they develop, the person who has received a transplanted organ, for example, has developed really deep desires and likes for things that they've not even remotely liked or wanted ever before in their life. An example is a gentleman that I remember treating many, many years ago. He was a really clean foods guy, and he had eaten very sort of cleanly. He really loved his raw food for nearly all of his adult life, and it worked well for him individually. And he ended up having to have heart surgery. And after the surgery, literally when he woke up, not in recovery, but when he was back in the room and he came to, when he was consciously aware of it, when he woke up, he could not for the life of him understand why he wanted fried chicken, Kentucky fried chicken, actually. And he craved it and he craved it. And so he ended up eating it and he ate it. But he had just had a heart transplant, by the time he got out and he was able to eat it, and he's trying to, quench his desire or his thirst for this fried chicken. But he was really distressed, really, really, really distressed when he came to see me, because this went against the grain of who he was fundamentally. And he was just had a heart transplant and he couldn't stop craving and eating this. So he sought help, because the current team that he had around him were really lost. They didn't know what was causing it and what was going on. So he was helped with the therapy that I use, the integrated healthcare system known as the Body Talk system that I use. And during his treatment, it was found that the donor had a real hankering for fried chicken. And it was this memory that had passed on and that was now showing up in him so loud and so strong. So he was really, really relieved, because it was that one treatment that pretty much resolved the cravings. And he was able to very quickly and easily return to his normal eating ways that worked for him and that he loved so much, just very, very easily. But it's a great example of how memory gets stored throughout the body. Obviously when that person, the donor, had eaten fried chicken, it was a very sensory experience for them. They probably sat there and said to themselves so many times, I love chicken, I love fried chicken, which is probably why the heart carries that sensory information, that memory of eating fried chicken. Yeah. But it's also a great case for why it's imperative when you're treating somebody to treat the entire body-mind complex as a whole of integrated systems, not separate moving parts that are non-related. But that's essentially the way that a lot of people get treated these days, which is quite an old, outdated method of treatment. But it's simply not effective, which is why I love what I do so much. So, getting back to this, you're in that age bracket, 0 to 7 years of age. You're sponging information left, right, and center, consciously aware of the information that you're sponging to a certain degree, and then all this information coming in subconsciously from people, TV, books, music lyrics. Now, have you ever really sort of stopped to listen to music lyrics? If you have music that you're listening to often, and they are lyrics that are telling stories very similar to, like doing it tough, falling on hard times, losing out in love, always being second best, always losing out, that kind of thing. That is a dialogue that your mind is having with those music lyrics. That is a dialogue that your mind is listening to and taking as actual information. Okay? It's all sensory information, and it's been collated, and it's been sorted, and it's been stored. And much of it is filtered out so that it's not overwhelming to you consciously. But a lot of it gets stored as deep, deep subconscious information. Then it sits unconsciously. And the mind then just works relentlessly to create what it is that it's told all the time. So if it's being told stories because you're listening to music that, is about being on down times and life being tough and everything, the mind is going to look for that reality, and it's going to want to create that reality. So all I'm saying is just be a little bit picky with what you listen to, and listen to things that uplift you. If you really do have a song that you love that talks about down times or whatever, but it might also, talk about how this person makes it in the end or they succeed. There's not really anything wrong with that if you're going to listen to it from just time to time. But I'm more concerned about people who are listening to the same types of lyrics all the time, day in and day out, because that's what the mind becomes heavily invested in and then wants to manifest and create. It looks for that in the reality, and life will follow suit. So it's just something to be aware of, right? And again, if you've watched last week's webinar, then understanding the different aspects of the mind will make it so much easier for you to be able to understand this week's webinar as well. So I'll put the link for that into the comments. As the sensory information is being taken in, it's being filtered, there are several things that is meant to happen. One of the things that they do, and sometimes they do a lot, is that they change the information. The filters do, it changes the information as it's coming in, and it distorts the information. So by the time that your brain and the mind is getting the final product of the sensory information, so told what it is that you're seeing or hearing, the brain and mind is getting a version that is not even the truth. It's not clear, it's heavily distorted, and it's filtered. And it's one of the reasons, why some people can see auras or see etheric fields or see the Wei Qi that, exists around the body or runs through the body, or that exists around plants or animals. It's, one of the reasons why some people are great mediums, or they're great at telekinesis, or, lots of these other things, because their filtration system, some of their filters are let's say, are unfiltered. There's no distortion, fragmentation through those filters that tells them that they can't do it. It's just easily and effortlessly an ability for them to be able to do. So the more unfiltered they become, the less mind power you actually have. The more mind power you actually have. And then the more mind power that you have, the more ability that you're going to be able to have. And you're going to be able to get access to being able to not only do all these other things, but then being able to perceive, understand all of these things as well. So when a person gets really heavily filtered information that stores up within their senses, which then leads to being the mind heavily filtered and clogged up, the brain and memory centers being heavily filtered and clogged up. I'm going to give you 2 examples of how this can affect somebody, especially somebody who then is either battling with judgment or projection, whether it's them doing it a lot, receiving it a lot, perceiving it a lot, getting hurt from it a lot. Okay, so I'll give you 2, and these are really rough examples, but there are literally millions that I could have chosen from, but I want to give you these 2. So we have person A. Let me check if I've got any questions first. No. Oh, thanks, Stace. Okay, beautiful. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Stace was just inviting somebody in. So if you feel like somebody would benefit from this, tag them in it. We're getting towards the end part now, but they can come in and then watch it again later and they'll know where to find it. Okay. So person 1 grew up in a house where maybe, they're little, remember? So in 0 to 7, we're sort of experiencing this, looking at this from a little person's perspective. They grew up in a house where mum was battling a hormone imbalance and it's undiagnosed. Okay. And this hormone imbalance, it's just seen because the body can't deal with the hormone imbalance and lots of things start going wrong. And the body is probably carrying more and is bigger than what it would normally be if those hormones were balanced and everything else then was working the way that it was meant to be. So it's undiagnosed and it's just seen as her mind sees it as being fat. So when she was little and growing up, her mum was always really, really self-conscious of her weight, how things looked on her when she wore them. She often heard her mum say, "I'm so fat. I hate being this fat." And she might be grabbing at the skin on her arms and her legs, grabbing chunks of skin, saying, "I wish I could lose weight. I feel disgusting like this." All right. All this sensory information that person A, as a little child, saw, heard, felt deeply, the experiences even left a taste in her little mouth. Maybe it soured her to people being ridiculing of themselves. Maybe she triggers towards that when people get down on themselves, when they ridicule themselves. Maybe it left a bitter taste in her mouth because she didn't want to get fat like her mum, right? And it deep down made her really fearful because she didn't want to feel the way that her mum felt about herself because that's all she saw. And maybe person A has grown to understand that things pass on from family member to family member. They're vaguely familiar or they've heard of the word hereditary, and they have a really vague misunderstanding of what that actually means. And as they grow up, their mind starts to view their skin and what lies beneath it as fat. The sense of sight gets distorted because now it's starting to see fat. It's starting to see bulk. It's starting to see ugliness. And they become really fearful and judgment of the fat. The mind just sees fat being replayed over and over again. And what can the mind do but manifest, of course? So what the mind sees, what it is always being told, is in fact what it will work its ass off to create. So then it creates more storage in the fat cells. And when person A then later in life looks in the mirror, all of her senses that are heavily filtered with this, with her own filtration system, all of her senses that are filtered through her own life experiences merge with her memory of her mum. And the end result is a mismatch of information being told directly to her mind that she is so fat, that she hates being fat, that she's just like her mum. And all the while, she may have people around her seeing something very, very, very different. You know, she might have family members, she might have friends, she might have a partner, and they see somebody who's quite a good weight, who's strong, who has good muscle definition. But her mind is being told otherwise, and as a result, she may be very, very judgmental towards herself. And so the pattern continues. It's easy for person A to pass this on. They project it unconsciously, unknowingly, they don't know they're doing this, in their own environment, and maybe person's A's son or daughter in their first sort of 0 to 7 years of life, they pick up this information, and then it merges with their sensory information, with their filtration system. It merges with their mind, and the pattern continues exactly like that, right? So that's a really generalized way of how we can perceive sensory information, be quite judgmental towards it. It merges with our own, clashes with our own experiences of life. We then become really judgmental towards ourselves, and quite often it's a very distorted view of actually what's going on in life. This is a second example, and I listed this because it's a really, really common one that I see a lot, okay? Again, we have person A. They're in the first 0 to 7 years of their life. They might come from a family where both parents, mum and dad, have suffered quite a lot of stress and trauma in their life. And maybe they were both abused to a certain degree by a church member when they were children themselves. And maybe the parents have now grown up, they've never ever reconciled that. They carry the wounds, their open wounds, not healed. And it prevents them from being able to connect in their marriage deeply with one another, both openly and truthfully. Maybe they hide their feelings and their true kind of, like shining inner personality from one another. There always seems to be an air of tension in the environment. So even though on the surface everything looks okay to people, from the 0 to 7-year-old, they're always sensing tension. There's always that tension there just sitting underneath the surface. And maybe person A watches them fight from time to time. When things get tough and they don't know then how to come together and work as a team, where they talk it out, they work it out, right? They don't have those capabilities. They get over defensive and over protective of their feelings, each of the parents. They are judgmental towards each other, other people, and then they trigger and react towards judgment that comes towards them from others really severely. Sometimes the way that they trigger is actually quite aggressive because they can't handle it. So person A grows up and finds that they feel really aggressively judgmental towards the concept of religion, okay? All religious bodies and anyone who practices any kind of faith at all. They think that it's all bullcrap and causes so much bad hurt in people. So there's just no acceptance, just a lot of judgment and uncontrolled feelings. In that first 0 to 7 years of life, 0 to 7 years of life, a lot of what that person experiences, a lot of what anyone experiences just becomes deeply subconscious memory and information. So a lot of the times these people will have all these feelings and judgments, but they don't really know why. They might come to me and say, I have a vague memory of like mum and dad like never really being able to work things out when things were tough and they fought a lot and everything like that. But they won't understand why, okay? So maybe then also person A in this scenario finds it really hard to be open, to be vulnerable themselves, to be honest and trusting of anyone. And as a result, they've never ever had a trusting and healthy relationship, even though they're now in their mid-30s. They don't know how to be in a healthy relationship. In fact, they most likely have a judgment that they don't even exist. Healthy relationships don't exist. Those experiences in the first 0 to 7 years of life can be so profound and so sticking that the mind will just get very attached to believing that it is that way and there is no other way. So this person could just totally believe, well, that's the way all relationships are. And if that's the way they are, then I don't want to do it. So then they never seek them. They never seek anything better for themselves. They most likely react really strongly when someone projects judgment towards them. They don't even know how to let it wash past them because they were just never shown how to do that. It's not possible for them. In fact, the method in their mind has developed from learning how to deal with judgment is to judge back. You fight judgment with judgment. Now, it doesn't feel good. It never works out for them. It never results in things working out harmoniously, but they have no other resources in their memory or their mind or in the filters of their senses, right? That is dominant enough and automatic enough in response that it can be of any help to them whatsoever. So despite it feeling awful, it triggers instantly despite them, and they don't even know why. And that's a big deal, okay? All right. In the 13 years since I've been, helping and leading people and groups through this kind of thing, I see this showing up on pretty much a daily basis. It threads into every single part of a person's existence. What you had going on as an experience for you in the first 0 to 7 years, showing up and impacting your life, the way that you judge self, judge others, the way that you project. And remember, most of this happens unconsciously. And it's the fact that we're having these conversations and that you're listening to this, that you'll probably just start to be more aware of it and catch yourself and go, oh, that's interesting. I didn't notice that I had ever done that before. Yeah. So I want to sort of ask you, do you think, and I ask this quite a lot of my clients, do you think you're free of influence and having heavily filtered information from your past that leads you to having a distorted view of your today? Or that you're free of judgment towards yourself or others? Because if you said yes, then you would be wrong, because this touches and affects every single person in some way, shape, or form. And given that you're all so very, very unique and your own lives and stories are so different, it will have affected you all really, really differently. You're all influenced by your past. You're all heavily influenced by what your mind has interpreted as true and correct information and has now then built it to be fact and true for you, despite it most likely not even been true in a lot of cases. And there are many, many ways in which you can restore clarity to the senses, clarity to the mind, and then harmony to the entire body mind complex. As I said earlier, doing what you've done today with me now, that's huge. Like, well done for you sticking with it and going through the whole process, because not everyone can do that. Continue on with this as we move forward and do the other webinars in this series. And then after this series, I've got another beautiful series that is completely different that we're going to be moving through. So you can do that one as well. Yeah. You can do one-on-one work with me, or you can enlist to enjoy the amazing My Incredible Orbit community, which is my community where we bust through these and many other, limiting beliefs and health related things. And we keep being open to self-inquiry. Surround yourself with people who support you, and nothing less is one of my biggest things that I could suggest, right? So let's do a really quick recap because we're at the end now. Today, you've learned that judgment is not something that you are born innately with. You automatically breathe and you automatically love. You don't automatically judge and project. Judgment can easily be passed on ancestrally as personality traits, and they can form as habit, and it can activate and get stronger after stressful periods in people. It then tends to merge with that person's own life experiences, and then this is when people can go through major personality shifts, and it can be seen for not for being for the good, right? So it's like they can regress, they can pull back into themselves, they can become really rigid, very judgmental, quite angry, quite a triggered person. Okay, so there's a lot of processes happening for an individual when that happens. We don't want to go into blaming them, we just simply want to understand what it is that they're going through, have some perspective about it, and to be able to get them some support. We learnt that the first 7 years of your life was basically a massive learning experience where you're constantly absorbing and retaining information from your environment, and it teaches you or taught you how to view yourself and the rest of the world. And that information can seem like fact, and that can actually start judgment and cause a lot of judgment in a person, especially judgment towards self. We also learned that people can get into an unconscious pattern of fighting judgment with judgment. That's really, really common. Perhaps just, if you're on social media, probably if you're here, then you're going to be on social media. But take a look on social media. Watch the dialogue that happens in certain groups or on certain pages. And you'll see that if somebody's projecting judgment, quite often they'll fight that judgment with judgment. And it just ends up being nasty circle that keeps going round and round. And as I said, it doesn't resolve anything at all. Definitely doesn't feel good. So it's not innate to the person. And as you have throughout your life taken in sensory information, it has then been really heavily filtered, and the leftover bits after the filtration has happened, that information then fuses with past memory, mostly childhood memory. Some is going to be your adult memory, and it distorts the picture. Therefore, what your brain is told that you are experiencing most of the time is not even close to reality. Most people are reacting to a distorted version of life. You also learn that it can be changed and that it can easily happen. Don't let anyone tell you it's going to be hard or take, forever to be able to do it. It's simply not the case. And you are then in a place, when you can do that, you're in a place where you'll feel free and happy and in bliss and most in tune with yourself and happy to let others just get on with leading their own lives. So I hope after all of that, today has left you with some questions. That's a good thing. And also some clarity about how judgment can happen and where it can come from. So make sure that you're on my subscription list. And if you're not already, and it'll make sure that we get the information out to you when we're doing further updates, when we have more webinars coming out, when we have free resources. Generally, you'll always find me in here in my Facebook land, 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, or that is Queensland Australian time for those people that don't know their little AEST bit, which sometimes confuses a lot of people. And then that way, if you're subscribed, then you'll get all the tools and resources that can be sent out to you. Next week is a really special one because I'm going to be covering a lot of information that perhaps a lot of people aren't aware of. And I'm going to be talking about the different parts of the body that really suffer from judgment and projection. So quite often there is this whole other process happening when you're in judgment, or when you are perceiving judgment, or when somebody's receiving judgment, whether they like it or not. A lot of people receive it, they take it on board, yeah. And when this happens, it has a huge effect on different parts of the body, like your heart and your adrenals. So when, as an example, you're getting judgment from somebody else, and it might anger you or it might upset you or whatever, it's not just an emotion that you're experiencing where you might cry and you might feel sad. There's a whole internal process going on, very active, very mechanical, and involves different aspects of consciousness and the way that these different parts of the body express the consciousness throughout themselves. So we're going to be diving in and looking at that. And I'm really, really excited because it's one of my most favorite things to talk about. Okay. Let me check if there's any questions before I sign off. No, there isn't. Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. If after you've digested everything, you have any questions at all, pop it into the comments, or you can always email the office, info@jackiemcintyre.com, and I will most definitely get back to you. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye for now.